Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Busboys and Poets Books Presents, an in-house series we have here at Busboys and Poets here in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region. We're an independent bookstore that focuses on bringing together thinkers, dreamers, writers, and activists into a communal space to celebrate culture, books, life, all of that. And today we have a really not only special, but really important program. So tonight's book is Getting Me Cheap. And we're going to explore how the American dream is built on the backs of working poor women with a few guests. And I'm going to start with our guest tonight. Tonight, we have Wendy Chun-Hoon, who serves as the 20th Director of the Women's Bureau, appointed by President Biden on February 1st, 2021. Wendy is skilled at coalition building, bridging strategy across grassroots or community organizing, and public sector policymaking at the state and national levels. For the past 10 years, Wendy's led Family Values at Work, a national network of grassroots coalitions that have won more than 60 new paid leave policies. We love that. Bringing new rights to 55 million workers and their loved ones, and organizing to win greater access to childcare, fair wages, and employment conditions for workers. Joining her is Sammy Chavin Grant, also from Family Values at Work. She is their federal policy manager. Growing up Jewish in Charleston, South Carolina, Sammy learned from a young age that our world is designed to exclude people. This lesson evolved through her life into a passion for creating equitable systems that prioritize racial, gender, and economic justice. This has led Sammy to DC, where she volunteered by night as an organizer for the DC Paid Family Leave campaign and worked by day on building collective power to enact federal policy change. She lives in DC with her husband and loves to read fiction and enjoys a good meal with friends and family. And the women of the hour are authors. We are very honored to host them. We have Amanda Freeman, who is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Hartford and a writer of researcher of Motherhood and Work. She lives in Westport, Connecticut, and Getting Me Cheap from the New Press is her first book. Lisa Dodsen is research Professor Emerita at Boston College. She is the author of The Moral Underground, How Ordinary Americans Subvert an Unfair Economy, and the co-author of Getting Me Cheap, How Low-Wage Work Traps Women and Girls in Poverty, both from New Press, and Don't Call Us Out of Name by Beacon Press. Working with local and national NGOs, Lisa continues to conduct research about the lives and views of low-income women in the U.S., and she lives in Portland, Oregon. And I know it was a bit lengthy, but these are some really incredible women we're bringing on to talk about this amazing book, Getting Me Cheap. And I'm going to go ahead and bring them all on. Hi, y'all.
Hey. Hi, everyone. So to kick us off, I just want to say that I think this book is so important and so timely. I think actually focusing in on who in this country needs access to programs that the government can intervene on is just so important. And at Family Values at Work, stories is something that we try to center all the time. So I just want to say this book is really exciting and really important for our work. And I was wondering, to get us started, if y'all would like to give just kind of an overview for folks who haven't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, really. And first, I just want to thank you both. I want to thank Wendy and Sammy for joining us, and also thank Busboys and Poets. Wonderful venue for us. Amanda and I really wanted to write a book about how working poor mothers in the U.S. just actually manage their lives. There are some incredibly powerful statistics and trends that tell a story about scarcity, about inequality. But we've always thought it was really important to hear, in a sense, the understory, the story that you hear from people who are actually managing the day-to-day, and above all, moms, sitting at that kitchen table. How do you manage? So that was really what we sought. And altogether, we talked to about 250 moms, and they were all over the country, in states all over the country, and very diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, age. Some were very rural centered, some lived in the cities. So it was a real variation of who low-income working moms are in this country. And we actually designed the questions that we used with moms, with working poor moms and people advocating for them, to make sure that we were asking the right questions, and just some sort of really basic information that of these 250, most of them were earning between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. These are all employed. That's about what they were making. And they were either primarily or entirely responsible for taking care of their kids in their families. So, and really what we heard about was three major forces in their lives. One was their low-wage jobs, really wage poor jobs that were extremely demanding in different ways. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then also because they earned so little, they were eligible for, in some cases, trying to get some subsidies. So like food subsidies and healthcare subsidies and those. And that turns out to be a whole incredibly demanding job in and of itself that they're balancing at the same time. And then above all, their priority was living up to their belief of what a good mother is, that's what they held most above all else. And, taking good care of kids was really the central theme. So we did this for years before COVID and throughout COVID and a little bit after COVID. And as I say, we collected about 250 accounts. And in one of those early on, one mother, after she listened to her own story, she sort of reflected and said, they really get me cheap in this economy. They get me cheap. And so that was the name of the book.
I was just going to add, I think of it as being kind of, we hear these stories of work-family conflict for more affluent moms, and we really wanted to tell the larger story with smaller stories of work-family conflict for these moms making $12, $13 an hour. And it's much more extreme conflict, the safety of their children is at risk. And I think it's much less kind of in culture, in what we talk about, hear about, read about.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that foundation as we kick our conversation off. And one of the first chapters is talking about how young girls are impacted by their mother's conflict. So I don't know why don't we start there and just dig in on what does that look like and what's the impact on these young women that you talk to?
Well, I'll take that one. If you just look at what we were just saying initially, the kind of framework for the book, there's an enormous gap in how these families are handling everyday lives. There's an economic gap. They don't earn enough money to cover everything. There's also an incredible time gap, and above all, time to take care of the people in your family. Because if you're juggling these different jobs and you're juggling trying to get some food stamps or SNAP, and you're juggling, these women's lives were unbelievably busy. And so one of the ways in which they tried to make up for, they didn't have the money to buy services. One of the ways that we found pretty systematically in listening to women talk about their childhoods was that they did a lot of care work in their families. They did a lot of just sort of household chores, and they took on a lot of responsibilities early on. And above all, they were providing care for younger kids. That was probably the most outstanding feature. And, this is kind of an invisible truth, how kids are subsidizing low wages. It's not something that gets a lot of airtime, but we found in asking women about their lives that they would often hearken back to, well, when I was a little girl, I needed to do these things in order for my family to just get by. And that meant sometimes moms having suddenly to take a second shift overnight. So you're the person at home, or both your parents are working. So you're the person kind of taking care of younger kids. In some cases, parents went away to do seasonal work, farm work, or other kinds of work. And kids were taking care of households. And of course, a lot of this is kept very quiet. And women told us that girls sometimes they would actually stay home from school to take care of a younger child because a lot of their moms didn't have paid time off, didn't have sick days, and they'd lose their jobs, So, and, we often talk about wanting girls to get involved in STEM and getting involved in sports and getting involved in all of these. These are extracurriculars, these girls sometimes were unable even to go to school full time because they were helping out with families. So there was a big opportunity cost. I think we don't talk about childhood in America in this way very often, but we certainly, listening to these women, began to see it as girls were subsidizing low wages, and that childhood is something that belongs to certain class, but it doesn't belong to all people. I do want to add very quickly that the women we talked to wanted this to be said, that they did think they sacrificed a lot, that they were heavily burdened, but they also believed themselves to be very strong early on, to be decision makers in their families, to have a sense of not only being concerned with what I want, but had a lot of concern for their families, for sometimes extended families. And they saw themselves as also being very strong coming out of that and having a real sense of kinship. So it was important to them that this not just be presented as what they lost. And there was a lot of losses, but they also emerged, we think, as, really strong, thoughtful people.
Lisa, I was just going to add too, there were several instances of maybe a mom who was a nanny and kind of witnessing all the services that the affluent family was able to provide for their kids. And of course they would say, like, I want that too. I want a tutor and a coach.
Yes.
And so really just kind of like living that dual existence, and also, at the same time, they might not even be allowed to take their child to work with them. Right. So sort of the awareness of intensive parenting and all that can go into it. And you want your kids to have violin lessons, probably, or language lessons or tutoring, regardless of how much money you make, but just being unable to provide that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that actually leads right into my next question, which is what's the biggest, a theme in this at the center of the book and where we are right now is talking about motherhood. What would you say was the biggest obstacle from the mothers you spoke with that was preventing them? I think we're talking about it, we're talking about getting me for cheap, but are there specific things or themes you saw emerging that folks had to sacrifice consistently that you want to lift up?
Yeah, I always say first, we know that globally women are responsible for almost 80% of care work. So that's a huge burden and it's a huge amount of labor, right? We do a little bit better in the United States, but I think still we say women do about 37% more care work than men. So that's not just parenting, but the whole family, extended family. So of course that impacts work. And when you have work that's so inflexible and often so piecemeal and shift oriented, the obstacles are like literally getting care for your children and getting to work, not even earning a subsistence wage. Something that I was surprised about was just, I don't think, or Lisa can correct me on this, but I don't think any of the women we spoke with had access to sick leave.
Right.
Right. So not even getting to that like next, parental leave, family leave, but just sick days.
Yeah.
Or, feeling like maybe there was a policy, but they couldn't access it. It didn't count for them. So, that level of lack of benefits, lack of flexibility at work. And then also, I think most of them were single parents. So they're the only ones that are doing all of those parenting responsibilities, all of that care work. So just really setting up an impossible situation at work and at home, like you're set up to fail constantly.
Yeah. Yeah, we also really wanted Sammy to ask you and Wendy to speak to that very issue, because I know both of you, you have deep, long histories and commitment to this. So I don't know, maybe I'll start with you, Wendy. What kinds of things do you feel at this point, that could be coming out of federal policy or discussions that are happening that you would really lead with?
Yeah. Well, for those folks who don't know, the agency that I represent is the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor. Mm-hmm. And, we've got a century-old mission to really uplift the needs of working women. So this conversation is absolutely near and dear to my heart and to the Bureau. We're also, just so folks can sort of feel the weight, the only federal agency that's mandated by Congress to do this job. Yeah. So the opportunity clearly is to get a lot more people talking about this. And that's what I do feel like this administration, under President Biden, Vice President Harris's leadership, has done exactly that. So, absolutely leading through COVID and trying to figure out how we were going to remake our economy and our society is not the old normal, but the new normal. So that it would be more inclusive is top of mind for the administration and leadership all the way, from the top all the way down. Their president, it was right after day one, probably maybe day two, established an executive order that set up the Gender Policy Council as one of, the Biden-Harris administration's policy councils in the White House. So that council has really set about creating a whole of government expectation and also whole of government action plan to really dig into what's it going to take to achieve gender and racial equity in this moment, and what were the opportunities in the moment of addressing COVID. So a lot of the early investments in the relief packages were about investing in, at that point, emergency response to make sure that families did have childcare, to make sure that, the largely women, it's a 95% or better women workforce in childcare, mostly women of color. So to make sure that, that these women were also taken care of as they served on the front line. And I think we're still seeing the impact of some of those investments. So both, yes, to shore up what is the entire workforce that underpins the rest of us leaving the house every day to be able to go to paid employment. But also, these are historic investments, right? And so how states took those investments and really are learning how to do different, how to think about a more inclusive system, more of a system actually, is going to be really instructive, both in this moment, but also to come. So I think there have been a lot of important both leadership and expectation and delivery of some significant funding. I always think we need to be doing more because, this is care work, for example, is one of the lowest paid occupations in our country. And so the thing that I was thinking about that you said earlier, you were talking, Sammy, you asked a question about daughters and how they experienced, their mothers. And Lisa, you were talking about, young kids who are having to maybe sometimes skip school to make sure that their younger siblings are cared for, just basic care. That is a conditioning that plays out over and over and over again and starts very young. Yeah. And so we really shouldn't be surprised that we've got, a number of us in service jobs, in care jobs, and really way too few that are in some of the clean energy jobs or the STEM or IT or, advanced manufacturing, construction, all of the jobs that we're about to invest in over the next, decade, trillions of dollars to create some of these really good high paying jobs. So I think there's a lot that we can be doing, that we need to do to create the expectation that women will fill those jobs.
Yeah.
And actually, I was just going to say, I know Family Values at Work is doing a lot of advocacy in these areas. Could you kind of bring us up to speed on any campaigns, I don't know, either, about paid time off or parental leave, or that you think would really be helping these families?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. And for folks who aren't familiar with Family Values at Work, we're a national movement network. So we're rooted in 27 different states, and we center campaigns that work on paid family and medical leave, paid sick and safe days, and affordable childcare, and broadly a whole ecosystem of policies like equal pay days, and paying attention to actually creating gender, racial, and economic justice for folks across the country. So there's a lot happening. I think just bringing folks to where we are now with the federal government, we're staying highly engaged and we're really excited. And Wendy, I'd love to jump back to you because speaking about those manufacturing jobs, the Biden administration is being really intentional about childcare in particular. So I want to bookmark that. We'll circle back to that. But federally, we're looking at seeing a new paid family and medical leave program be introduced, but at the same time, our folks and our partners aren't waiting on that. So there are active campaigns for paid family and medical leave in Minnesota, in Vermont, in Maine, actually improvements coming right up the road in Maryland from many of our listeners. And in DC, there's a lot of great work happening on affordable childcare. So there's a lot, and I could probably spend our full hour together explaining all the wonderful efforts happening in the States. But I feel really connected to this work and to this book because I think you all are centering the voices of who Family Values at Work is trying to keep at the center when we're doing policy making. So I think our network has learned a lot. It's actually our 20th anniversary. So in the last 20 years, we've learned a lot about not just passing a policy, but really passing an equitable policy that doesn't leave someone out. So making sure that the hours worked match somebody who does shift work so that that's not a mother who would be like, that doesn't apply to me. I don't work enough for that. Or even thinking about like modern definitions of family, especially thinking about the folks that you interviewed. If people are single moms, there are other people in their lives who maybe step up. Maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's a grandparent, and making sure that leave policies recognize that our families aren't always this traditional one mom, one dad, and kids, and also being inclusive to LGBTQ families and folks with disabilities, and really being intentional so that all workers have access to leave. I think time to care, some folks call it a radical notion, but what Wendy was saying is we believe there should be a system for that it's not on individuals to have their child watch their kids or have grandma step in, but really that we as a society are accountable to taking care of folks. And Wendy, I really would love for you to drill down on this awesome initiative. I'm really excited by it with the investment in childcare that's coming down with these manufacturing jobs.
Okay, I'll take that, Sammy. That's great. Yeah. So when I was mentioning the administration is really set up sort of a whole of government response, this is a great example of that. So Department of Labor, where the Women's Bureau rests, didn't actually get funded by any of these infrastructure packages. Funding went to agencies like Commerce. And so in the spirit of whole of government, we have been working through an effort at the Department of Labor called the Good Jobs Initiative that is really focused very keenly on supporting our colleague agencies to focus on creating good jobs. And we've jointly defined what is a good job, right? Good paying, access to benefits, all the things that all the women that you interviewed are looking for, right? And should expect from their society. But also a free and fair choice to join a union. I'll come back and maybe say a little bit more about the union advantage to women. But in that, it's not just about, are these jobs good jobs? Who has access to them? So Commerce, for example, with the opportunity that they have in the advanced manufacturing and the semiconductors that will get invested in through the CHIPS and Science Act, is to say and signal to employers, as you are thinking about building out that, that piece of infrastructure, that advanced manufacturing around the semiconductors, think about who the workforce is going to be that builds the building, but also maintains and produces, the semiconductors, the chips. And also those folks live in a community where these fabs is what they're called, are going to be. And that community has not just the workforce that works in that plant, but that community has needs. And so the way that the grant funds were announced is that any applicant over 150 million must also think about a comprehensive childcare plan to go along with it. So I think that's incredibly important, right? You cannot have built infrastructure without care infrastructure. You can't have a workforce who's going to be there and come to work every day feeling confident unless they know that their family is cared for, and they don't question whether the folks who are providing that care have a living wage.
That's right. Yeah, and in some of the women that we interviewed, some here in Oregon and some on the East Coast, we're very interested in apprenticeships, becoming electricians, becoming carpenters, clearly the pay was better than their jobs in retail. Twice as much or 3 times once you become, go through the process. But, I interviewed some who, I mean, their jobs would start at 6 a.m. And so they'd have to leave their house, that's pretty typical for those kinds of jobs. And looking for childcare that would be open at 5:30 a.m. So a number of people gave up and went back to jobs that were just not going to make it possible to live in any kind of safe, stable way because they couldn't get through. So yes, I think that's wonderful that linking investing in better jobs with childcare is just fundamental. Yeah.
Right. I feel like a lot of times when the women were talking about obstacles or problems, it all kind of circles back to childcare,
Really
right? Because they have to have childcare in order to go out and work. And so I think in Georgia, we said 60% of people in focus groups had lost a job due to childcare related issues and problems. I mean, it was often, so many of the things we heard were inability to find a spot. The voucher system is so difficult to manage, even if you get a voucher to find a spot, just this kind of circle. So women saying you have to have a job to get a voucher, but really the job wants you to have childcare arrangements, right?
In order to even...
So we actually found that leading some moms to even hide that they were parents, which to me just felt very like, there was a mom that was saying like she had pictures of her kids in her wallet and she would say they were her sister's kids, right? Just because she didn't want people at work to know she had children and kind of flag her as a problem employee. So I do think, the issues with childcare seem like first and foremost have to be addressed in order to move forward in any of these ways. And like Sammy said, I think like a lot of these jobs, the non-traditional hours, right? Overnight care, like different kinds of care that is needed. I think sometimes also fall out of even like daycare centers. We think about just adding spots, but even that might not be enough. That might not help.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think something that I think about a lot, knowing that paid sick time is part of our work. What happens when that kid gets sick? Right. And you need to be able to take time off of your job to take them to the doctor. Or if you yourself are sick, you need to make sure that like you don't give that illness to your child and the child's still able to get care and you're able to take care of yourself. So I think the thing that is one of the greatest barriers to women in the workforce, and there's been a ton of great, well, not great because the numbers are really alarming and upsetting, but really important data has been put out in the last few years as an impact of COVID. All these women are leaving the workforce. And when you look at who's able to re-enter, if you break it down by race, it really is women of color who are being prevented from re-entering the workforce. And I think sometimes in these conversations, we speak broadly about care and broadly about the need, but also being really intentional about who we talk to and what the unique barriers are to different women and accessing programs. I used to work on food insecurity. So what you were talking about with being able to apply for SNAP, it's a full-time job to apply to benefits. And then, it's this catch-22 of if you start making more money, your benefits are going to go away. So what do you do in the interim before you can save up money? All of it is connected. And so I just really want to underscore that this is really important, and seeing, the stories that inform the advocacy that a group like Family Values at Work does, which can then help inform the federal policy that Wendy's spearheading. It's all connected. So I'm really glad we're in conversation. And I know that with Build Back Better, Wendy, the administration was working on keeping childcare centric. So didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to reflect on with that experience, because it was a really important effort.
Yeah. Yes. I want to come back and say something I kind of quickly touched upon earlier, that the investments made through the American Rescue Plan. So this is one of the earlier packages. And then again, investments through the budget, the omnibus. These are really important, historic, big investments in childcare. And I think we're going to learn a lot about how states took that money and are starting to think differently, right? Do differently. But I would be remiss if I didn't signal the president's budget that just came out last week, and the incredible underscoring of the acknowledgement that we need things like paid leave, paid sick and safe days, child care, elder care, et cetera. So those are important. That's obviously a value that's held close by this administration. And budgets are our policy, right? So I do think that that's important. The other two things that I was thinking about, Sammy, when you were talking are, one, this is still a workforce that is down, close to 6%.
Yeah.
So we just have to acknowledge that all of these things also reinforce an unstable workforce, right? The other thing is more of a tool, but something that people who are listening might be interested in, and I'd love to get more attention on it. It's a way in which the Women's Bureau can contribute. We worked with Health and Human Services and their Administration for Children and Family to really compile a first ever database that has 10 years worth of data. It's called the National Database of Childcare Prices. And what it does is it breaks down, we have enough data to really show at the county level. So this is some 2,300 counties across the United States, what the price of childcare is.
Yeah.
And that's an important tool because Lisa, you said this, when you're looking for work, you're also looking for childcare, and those two things are related geographically. And so knowing what childcare, what the price of childcare is at the state level is not very helpful.
Right.
Knowing what it is at the county level. And then the Women's Bureau added some analysis that really looked at, the higher prices are, the more negative impact that has on women's labor force participation. So these are brand new resources. I hope folks can use them. And then really importantly, that this is not about reducing prices by cutting costs on people, women's wages, right, who are the care workforce. This is about really creating a container for, or creating the analysis that supports the argument that this is not a zero-sum game. We have to actually invest more if we're going to have the kind of adequate, robust, responsive, inclusive system that people need, families need.
And I also think for women to be working together on it, right? To have all the information. I know more affluent moms that we talked about would say to me, childcare is so expensive, right? Yeah. So from their point of view, it's so expensive. So to be able to kind of see, and then to contrast that with knowing, I think the average childcare worker in the United States makes $12.50.
Right.
So I think Lisa had suggested before, that in terms of personal advocacy, that's something that people can do to try to make themselves aware. What am I paying at my childcare center, and what is the average worker at that childcare center making, right? Yeah. So to kind of keep both, I think, when possible, in mind at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And something we've heard from our partners across the country is, folks lose people at their childcare centers when a factory opens down the road and the pay is $10 more an hour. How is a small childcare center going to compete with an Amazon where the pay is better, the benefits are better, and there might even be more stable opportunities and benefits for that provider and their family? And I think sometimes in the conversation, we're thinking about the folks who use childcare and not the folks who provide it. And I know that Lisa and Amanda, I think that's a huge part of the book. So I don't know if there's anything you want to lift up, or particular stories or anecdotes that really kind of informed your conclusions around childcare particularly.
Well, we certainly met women who made decisions about going into care because that was the only way that they could make sure there were children in their family, sometimes their own, but sometimes other children in the family had care. So they would open a family, or a house, a home-based childcare. And sometimes they were, one woman, her dream was to be a marine biologist. That's what she really wanted to do. But there were demands that she felt were, absolutely urgent in her family. And gradually that became the work that she did was providing care. I also want to circle back to, we brought this up in a variety of ways, but I did want to kind of make a point, and we talk about this in the book. What are the real barriers that we see in terms of getting the subsidies? If you're not going to earn the wages that you should be earning so you can buy care, which is the way people who, are making enough money, they buy childcare, they buy different, and it's enormously expensive. It takes a big chunk, but that's how they do it. But as long as we keep, the minimum wage hasn't changed in 13 years, as long as we're keeping this very low wage, then the necessity to have subsidized childcare is just really, really great. And those are basically the two ways people get care. But I do think that what a lot of the women talked to us about they ran into was their relationship to getting public assistance of any kind, including childcare, is really, there is this whole kind of framework that we want to continue to bring attention to. And it kind of harkens to that, that mythology of the welfare mother. Is this person who is relying on the state, relying on public assistance and taxpayers, and we see that as still having an enormous influence on on keeping, and it's also, aside from it, the way in which it really is disrespectful for, these are working moms who are trying to get childcare or trying to get food assistance because they don't earn enough. But it's also very racialized kind of image, the welfare mother image. And it very much haunts a lot of, we found in interviewing women, very much haunts a lot of their efforts to get supports. So, and also restrains wages. So we really wanted to make that be part of it. It is wages and it's jobs. It's the needs of taking care of children, but it's also a social welfare system that has really has largely, it's missing. It has been cut way back, but it also treated women, their account after account of women talking about the way they were treated when they tried to get support.
I was just going to say, it seems so demoralizing. Like, I'm thinking of one woman in the book who had finally gained admission to nursing school, which was like her dream. We talked to her for several years. And then right before nursing school started, she had lost her childcare subsidy. And it really was just paperwork. It was a paperwork nightmare. She had kept all of her copies. She was much more organized than me. I remember this about interviewing her. And so she did retain a legal aid attorney. And she won, which is actually unusual, right, to be able to have that happen. But like almost a full either semester or a year had passed of school. It just seems like, oh my God, for heaven's sakes, like this is somebody who's really like ready to push forward, has found a spot, is ready to go, and then still having that setback. The other thing I wanted to add about childcare is in the book, we have stories of just, we think of childcare as a struggle for so many American families, but the safety issues a lot of the women told us about, the kids' diapers not getting changed all day. There's so many kids to one teacher. There are like buckets catching leaks, and then they're afraid that the kids have access to this rusty water. This sounds really like another, not in the United States kind of moments to me, or we don't think of this, but this is like the high stakes, I think. Go to work and leave my child in unsafe care.
Right.
Really felt like the choice for many of them. So I have to say, we talk in terms of solutions a lot about universal childcare. And you have to think that a system that is for everyone, right, is going to raise the level of childcare services, certainly in the country, which is something I think that would benefit all moms.
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you think about it, if your child's not safe, are you really able to be present at work? And then what's the downstream impact if the child's not in a safe environment, thinking about the child's development and their safety, but then also for mom, I think something that you both mentioned in the book is who is able to actually get a promotion and move forward. It's probably not the mom who's sitting there worried that her child is unsafe in the care. And I think that's a theme that you both touched upon, is who's able to move forward and who isn't. And I'm curious if you all wanted to dig a little deeper into that, because I think all of these pieces are connected. And I really appreciate the referencing of our welfare system. The safety net is full of holes. And there's a deeply racist history that makes it hard to access in the first place. And also, to me, as somebody who worked on food insecurity, it is laughable. You can't really even afford food on SNAP. I encourage anybody to look into it, but it's not actually something that somebody could live off of. And I think that it's important to tell the truth about that, because I think we just kind of allow this to be perpetuated, and folks understand that the idea of a welfare queen is not a good thing, but to really dig down and think about, like, who is it affecting and how's it impacting their long-term career and their family's health and safety is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Amanda and I have always been amazed and impressed by the tenacity, the absolute determination of so many of the low-income women we've met to try to get into apprenticeship programs or go to college, finish a degree. But they're always doing this at a cost which is just profound and I think largely invisible, which is obviously why we wrote the book. And so the whole, the support for women and the support for, racial equity and hiring and those issues are just profoundly important. But they have to take into account the real conditions that low-income moms are juggling in order to get ahead. We've interviewed moms who went into colleges, and some of the programs have had childcare, although fewer and fewer. And the only way to get support for childcare in states was if you also were working. So they were working at least half time, they were taking full course load, and they were raising kids as single moms. And that's the backdrop. That's the truth of how to get ahead. You brought that up, Sammy, and I think it's a really important issue. If we want anything like equity and diversity, then we have to recognize that a lot of low-income women, they bring their families with them. That's how they move forward. They don't leave them all behind. And we were amazed by some of what people were determined to do to get that degree. But, a lot of people, they get exhausted and there's just too much. And so, yeah.
I mean, it's terrible to say, but I think the retention rate, at least if you're looking at like 4 to 6 years for parenting students and specifically single parents, is around 5%, right? So like so many of the women we talk to really they all want their kids to get a college degree. They want to get a college degree. They see this as a way to move up and out. And our institutions are just not catching up to meeting their needs and helping them to attain those credentials.
I would just add that we're not going to be able to meet this moment without women, right? There just isn't the workforce that's adequate to meet this moment. And so the good news is that makes us think about, doing differently, right? So along with these infrastructure dollars, I have learned about workforce dollars that are absolutely about supportive services. So supportive services can range from anything like having the right tools and equipment to being able to access pre-apprenticeship, which is that early part of the pipeline, right? To training and credentialing, to mentoring, really important. And also really importantly for things like childcare. So I would say to everybody as you're talking to folks across the country, be aware that we should be looking for those supportive services dollars alongside these infrastructure investments. That's right. So that we really can, meet the moment and support workers who want to be in these careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we got this one question, how do we protect marginalized children from the conditions that we're seeing today? With labor and with childcare, and yes, there have been these recent investigations about child labor. I mean, I think one thing that Amanda and I just come back to again and again is if we have to pay people enough so that they can not rely on their children, not rely on putting their children in the workplace to bring in income because the family just is not earning enough, or rely on, as we've talked about, often sometimes girls and boys, to be the adults at home so that they go juggle 2 or 3 jobs or seasonal work because hourly wages are so low. So we have to raise wages. And then we also have to, be, as many countries are, really invest in our kids and our families. We are rare in the world now. The US stands out as a country that is not investing in care for our children and families. And so it's not one or the other, it's both. But that's how other families rely on childcare. They buy it. they use their income. So both those two, that just what you were saying, supportive services, invest in the social infrastructure, but also we need to pay people enough so that they can actually, that they can go to the market and be able to buy what they need, in this case, childcare.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I think we have other questions. Wendy, I think this question is specifically.
Yeah, so here's the question that came in. President Biden recently vetoed ESG, which was a large contributor of the socially equitable policies that we began seeing companies enforcing, such as Walmart and other large corporations. Do you see this being a hindrance to the initiatives you all are mentioning regarding creating safe spaces for mothers in the workplace? And I have to say, I don't personally know even enough to be dangerous about this. So I might see if anybody else wants to. Can I go back though before we move to this question? Just wanted to share. I mean, because the Wage and Hour Division is part of the Department of Labor. So on the piece that the person just asked about child labor, just want to underscore from our colleagues in Wage and Hour who have really seen this as a systemic, right? As a systemic issue, right? This is a whole community issue where, just as you said, Lisa, it's really important to recognize who are the other workers in that family and are they being fairly compensated, right? So I'm sorry that I don't know enough about the second question, the nexus of creating safe workspaces for mothers in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm also not sure. I mean, a lot of the moms that we were talking with didn't necessarily, I mean, sometimes by choice and sometimes not, work enough hours in Walmart, Target. I mean, they were often piecing together different jobs in order, so I don't even know if they would necessarily qualify like for retirement, right? A lot of those employers, you have to work, right, more than 30 hours. And we found some of them, kind of being kept below that 30 hours, either intentionally or, the moms generally would tell us they were really looking for these kind of mother's hours positions so that they could be available for their kids. Also just because, childcare to get off the bus can be expensive. So some of them would work overnight in security. I'm thinking of one mom, and then also, in Target during the day, but maybe not reaching a threshold to get the benefit package from either employer, right? So I think that's a problem that we ran into with a lot of the moms we talked with.
Yeah. And before we move on from this, would you mind defining the mom hours language? Because I'm not sure everybody who's listening would know what you mean.
Yeah. So the moms that we talked with really wanted to be able to put onto the bus and get off of the bus, essentially. And, maybe not the bus, maybe it was an after school program, but really wanted to be able to help with homework. And be present, intensive parents. I mean, they're also exposed to this model of parenting. They want to be there for their kids. They want to be there for the after school activities. I think it's interesting sometimes the way that we perceive that, right? When affluent moms are like sacrificing to be present, we really tend to revere it. Whereas a lot of times, I worked as a high school teacher for a little while, and there is sometimes the sentiment of like, where are these parents, because they're supposed to be here for like all these different, I feel this with my own kids, like what is this assembly like thing happening during the day, different appointments, parent teacher, and some jobs it's really difficult when your presence is required to leave. I remember one woman saying like she worked in a nursing home. So like, even if she got the call that her child is sick, if she's the only one in this caregiving role, she really can't leave, right? And meanwhile, the school is like, how are we calling this parent? And they're not showing up because the kid is having a crisis at school. So really just, again, that like butting up against the expectations for the mothers we talk to.
That's right.
Thank you for that. And we do have a question for Amanda and Lisa, which is, what was the most eye-opening interview or piece of information that you found while you were researching and interviewing and writing the book?
I think there were so many, but I think the theme running that we've been bringing up was just the extraordinary creativity and commitment among so many different women to somehow make it work for their families. And, a lot of what they do is kind of underground. It's not, for instance, relying on children to take care of children. If that became public, I mean, the kids, some moms said that, or some women said that when they were children, they were told when they went to school, they would not share the fact that they were home alone with younger siblings, because we all know what the response to that is, that Child Protective Services doesn't come knocking on your door to offer you help because, my goodness, you're not making enough, your wages are too low and you don't have childcare. And they knock on your door to tell you you're being unfit. You're not a sufficient mom. And so operating in what was extraordinary to us always is operating with all of those constraints and in many cases biases towards particularly women of color, just the absolute determination, the strategies that women use with their children. Their children are part of those strategies, and also with a kind of keen sense that, what matters most, which is their kids and their family and each other. I think that for both of us, sometimes what really stood out was we met women who we would like them to be leading. We would like them to be the leaders of our states or in our legislature, or their understanding of what matters most and their determination really was, we would love to see that lifted up and be part of who leads us as a nation.
Yeah, I would probably just add that I mean, maybe this is a depressing note, but I just kept being struck by like this deferral of their dreams.
Yeah.
I think I started out in the beginning really asking everybody about their career aspirations. And I mean, it just became really clear, like their current aspiration was just their kids, like to get by for their kids. Some of them talked about like when their kids are older, they would maybe circle back around to, and often what they wanted to circle back around to would be like nonprofit work.
Yeah.
Because they had been helped in many cases by these different nonprofit organizations. Thinking of one woman who really had all this contact with domestic violence advocates and wanted to become one. But we all know those jobs don't pay well either, right? And often don't have very flexible hours. So they would sort of say, that might be a dream like for later, but for now, how do we get by, right? How do I be a present parent for my kids?
Right.
Maybe I work overnight in a warehouse. That might not be, the dream that I have for my life, but it's what I'm going to dedicate myself to right now.
Thank you for that. We have one more question that I think was really for all of us, but how do we support childcare workers in this climate that doesn't seem to prioritize or value children? And how do we support mothers and families? Wendy, do you want to go first?
I mean, I think it's not one or the other of the things that we've been talking about. It's clearly all of them together in a more comprehensive and cogent package. We need paid sick days. We need paid family medical leave. We need adequate child and elder and disability care. We need to make sure that the wages of that workforce are enough to feed their own families. So I actually can't prioritize between them.
Just to say, like, the care for our children is like the most important thing to all of us. We're like care for our elderly parents or the people that we love. So we kind of have to put our money where our mouth is, I think, in terms of this. I mean, we're not giving the monetary value to care work in this country that it deserves.
And I think that, a lot of people spend a lot of their income, even who have a decent income, on care. And so joining with childcare workers and joining with, working class and lower income parents to say that we must invest as a whole nation in care work, that we should be working together on that. Sometimes that these, there's this way in which we look at paying childcare workers more as somehow that's going to be a problem for people paying for childcare. No, if we say that this is the infrastructure. The infrastructure is our children and our families as much as any bridge or highway. And so let's all together say that every child has a right to that decent care, and every parent has a right to rely on that in order to do the things that she really is seeking to do in her own life.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think it's wonderful to read books like this. And then the question I have for the question asker is, what are you doing to join the movement? Because it really is a movement. And I think I'm currently a childless adult who's married, and I just have my husband and I, but I care deeply about affordable childcare because some of my best friends are having their first kid. Or if you're not currently caring for an older adult in your life, it's highly likely that someone you love and you want to be there for needs that kind of support. And also undergirding all of this, we all get sick. So at some point, every single person who's listening to this, who has the opportunity to read this book, or even who isn't thinking about it, is impacted by our failing to have a care infrastructure. So I would urge folks to really be moved towards action, because we can create a collective environment. Instead of just saying, oh, the government doesn't care, the government is accountable to the people that it governs. So I encourage the person who asked that question and everyone who's listening to be actively engaged in paying attention to what's happening in your community and federally. And Lisa and Amanda, I want to just ask you both, one of the really profound closing quotes in the book is from Lang Lang Chansey, who's actually a member of the Family Values at Work Network. And Lang Lang told you both, I am not looking for allies anymore, but co-conspirators who take risks. So with our last few minutes, curious if you two would want to, expand on what does that mean and what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a wonderful challenge, and I think that essentially what this means, or how we took it and we're running with it, is that, this is something we need to actively be engaged in, from wherever we're sitting, that just as there are just some riveting issues that we all as a whole community, as a society, need to respond to: climate change, some housing issues. But this issue about that we pay so many people less than they can basically take good care of their kids. And I think one part of our answer is we need to be talking about it, and we need to see where we can jump in and get engaged, not start a new organization, not become leaders, but actually listen and learn from those who are already doing this, and pull up a chair. I
was just going to say, think about, if you employ domestic work in your own life, right? Like, how do you treat that person who comes and helps with childcare in your own home? Is there a way you could ally with them? There are lots of organizations, right, that allow for employers that to work with your domestic worker in your workplace, right? To just know, I know at University of Hartford, where I teach, there's a different policy in terms of leave for staff versus faculty, right? So to just ask, in your company, who has access to the on-site childcare? If it's, PepsiCo, is it people in the bottling factory who are hourly workers, or is it only salaried professionals? And then to take that advocacy to the policy levels that we're talking about too, I think is really important to support policies and really pay attention to how they impact all moms, is what I would say.
Thank you both. I think, Wendy, is there a final, we only have like 2 minutes left because Lori's back, but Wendy, was there a final word you wanted to share?
I'm going to disappear.
No, Sammy, all I was going to say is, for this whole conversation, your shirt, which I can guess what it says on the bottom.
Yes.
The part that we saw for the whole conversation said family. So I think that is the
That
bottom.
word.
Absolutely. Completely agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all so much for this incredible conversation. And Sammy, I just really want to echo what you said earlier. I myself don't have any children, but I have children in my life through my sisters, through just, walking down the street and being a neighbor to a family. And hopefully we can all really rise to the occasion and heed the call of being the co-conspirators that women, families, children, our communities really, really need. So thank you all. And like you all said, I also, Lisa, you were like, don't make new orgs.
Yeah.
Stick together.
Yes.
It's so important really to do that kind of community building and grassroots building and not trying to remake the wheel. So thank you all so, so much. And everyone at home, you can buy a copy of Getting Me Cheap either at bookshop.org from your local independent bookstore or us here in the DMV. If you are here in DC, you can come and visit us at any of our 9 locations at Busboys and Poets Books. And yeah, we hope you all have a great rest of the evening, a lovely week. And remember, try to be the co-conspirator that kids deserve. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you too.